Welcome back to the War Room, my beautiful people and fight fans from all around the world. I am your fight goddess, Chris Baldwin, and I'm here with my co-host, my sister, Melissa Smith. She is a women's boxing historian, and my boy, Mr. Eddie Goldman. We call him the conscious of combat sports. Today, we're going to talk about the sports washing with the Anthony Joshua and Usyk fight because they are fighting in Saudi Arabia. So Eddie, let's just break down give us your insights on that and what you feel like the Western media is not getting right, because I know you've got some issues with them. So let's talk about it.
Right. Thank you for that intro. You know, part of the discussion is obviously right. Saudi Arabia is well documented, has a horrendous human rights record. I alluded to that. I just did an article on Patreon about that. The latest example, they busted a whole bunch of shops which were selling crayons and children's toys and pencils, which were brightly colored, and some of them had rainbow patterns. And they said this was, quote, promoting homosexuality, just insane kind of stuff, and including apparently in the stuff they confiscated was a box of Crayolas, the crayons. So there are no political parties, there are no trade unions, there's no really free independent media. It's an absolute monarchy, and it's a theocracy where their version, their interpretation of Sharia law is the law. They don't even have a written penal code, which they're supposedly working on, but there's no transparency or public debate about what should be in forthcoming penal code. It's just being done at the very top. And obviously nothing will get in there which won't be approved by the monarchs, the crown prince, the de facto ruler, Mohammed bin Salman, because the king Salman is still ruling, but he's elderly and kind of ill. So Mohammed bin Salman is the guy who's really running the show. And there are all sorts of examples. They have all sorts of executions going on, persecution of various activists who for democracy. They even sometimes have purges among different sectors of the royal family and the elite and the monarchs who are opposed to the direction that the current group is doing, and they confiscate their property. There's a lot of articles about that. So in that sense, that's entirely true. It's one of the most repressive regimes in the world. But on the other hand, the discussion has been very one-sided in the Western media. And I'll just give an example of that if I can call up this article. There was an article that came out today. We're recording on Tuesday evening, right after the press conference in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, with Oleksandr Usyk and Anthony Joshua. And Joshua was asked about sports washing. And the definition that was given in this AFP article, and I never took French, so it's Agence France Presse. Maybe someone who knows French could pronounce it better than me, but that's like the main news agency in France. And it talked about how Saudi Arabia recently set up a breakaway golf circuit, the LIV golf circuit, that has many top players. They pulled away from the PGA, which then suspended them. They also bought Newcastle in the English Premier League, which ruffled a lot of feathers. They're one of the major football clubs in the UK. And they asked Joshua about this. And of course, Joshua's fight with Ruiz was there in December 2019. And earlier they had Amir Khan against Billy Dibb. And even though that was kind of a mismatch, Amir Khan is a big international celebrity. And before that, they had some of the finals in the World Boxing Super Series. And they would have had more, except, of course, in 2020 and 2021, the pandemic slowed everything down, the international travel, sports, everything. Now a lot of that is starting to resume. So now this fight is going to take place August 20th. And Joshua was asked after the press conference, because at the formal press conference, there were no questions and answers. I mean, this is Saudi Arabia, but he was asked about sports washing. And AFP defined sports washing, they said, as, quote, attempting to distract attention from the country's human rights record. And to me, that is, if I were a professor or a teacher, and that was the definition given by a student writing about this of sports washing, I might give that like a C minus, because it's only part of it. Now, Joshua basically gave an answer to the media. I'm here to win the heavyweight championship of the world. I like Saudi. I think Saudi's good. I'm having a good time here. I'm treated really well. All that allegation stuff for me, I'm not caught up in any of that stuff. I'm here to have a good time. Mix with the local people, bring entertainment to Saudi. Now, he had been called upon by Amnesty International UK not to boycott Saudi Arabia, but to speak out on these various human rights issues. And he chose not to, feigning ignorance on it. But to me, there's another aspect to this. And it's not in any way, I don't want to in any way have this be interpreted as minimizing what goes on in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, this oppressive monarchy. It's this definition of sports washing that all they're doing is trying to detract attention from the human rights record. That's all that's going on here. This is just a big charade and a big ruse. And that is not true. Saudi Arabia is a country, started out as a desert kingdom with the development of finding oil, eventually setting up OPEC, becoming a major economic force in the world, as a petroleum exporting country, amassed an enormous amount of money because it's not really that big of a country. They have a public investment fund, PIF, which is a sovereign wealth fund that has estimates of having $620 billion lying around for the monarchy and these royals to do what they want, and it's controlled by Mohammed bin Salman. So what are they going to do? First of all, the petroleum is only going to last so long, another couple of decades. It's a finite amount. Second of all, we know all that's going on with climate change and global warming. The world is moving away from fossil fuels. In fact, it's even decreased. And some countries, like the United States, are moving to become less dependent on Middle East oil. So they're looking at this, and Mohammed bin Salman, I think he's in his mid-30s or so, they're looking at this and they go, what's going to happen with our country 10, 20, 30 years down the road? How are we going to continue to develop and prosper? And from an economic standpoint, they very clearly realize with their so-called Vision 2030, they have to diversify the economy. And what are they most likely to do? Well, part of it is just investing in all sorts of things. They're investing in businesses that exist and have been making money in the West. But on the ground in Saudi Arabia, they're developing their sports, tourism, and entertainment sectors. It'll be very difficult to develop a really robust manufacturing sector outside of petroleum, given the weather conditions there, but you could put up buildings, put up air conditioning, and do all that. And this fight is in Jeddah, which is really an interesting choice because it's a port city on the Red Sea. It's also the gateway to the Muslim pilgrims going to Mecca and Medina, but it's also where right now the center of their tourism efforts are, more so than Riyadh. So this is where this fight is going to be. They haven't announced the venue. It might be at the 35,000 seat Superdome there. that's hosted many other events, including earlier this year, WWE show. Now, again, that's not sport, but it shows you could have an entertainment event in there and have a lot of fans. I don't know if they had a ring or whatever they did for the WWE, but obviously for this fight, they'll have a ring. And this is also related to development of their sports sector. Sports have been developing, including many combat sports, in Saudi Arabia for people that are there. They recently had a big boxing exhibition that they worked with the TKO fighters and Salt Gym, and of course with the Saudi Arabia Boxing Federation, which is part of the government. It's part of the Ministry of Sport. And they not only had male fighters, they brought in fighters from a number of other countries. They had many female fighters there too. And one of the key people that organized this, who spoke at the press conference for Usyk and Joshua too, was Raja Al Khamis, the vice president of the Saudi Arabian Boxing Federation. She's a board member of the Asian Boxing Federation. And she is somebody that studied internationally. She studied at the University of South California, USC. And she had said she fell in love with boxing back in 2011. She moved back to Saudi Arabia after studying abroad in 2017, and she became the country's first ever certified woman boxer and coach. And she's developing what she says are long-term strategies in Saudi Arabia and gender equality programs. And we know by Western standards, these are extremely limited. They're not up to what we would want to happen. But it shows it's a little more complicated in terms of what's going on. And what's interesting about her, you can actually see her LinkedIn and Twitter. You can see her on social media, and she's not wearing a hijab or any of the veils that are required within Saudi Arabia. So some of this stuff is starting to change, and they're developing this amateur boxing program. Eventually, they want to get a professional boxing program going on. So what are they doing to encourage the youth to get involved in boxing, which is one of the many sports getting people involved in? You bring in major fights. You bring in Anthony Joshua, the fight with Ruiz. You bring in this fight with Usyk. Obviously, this is one of the most important fights of the year and in the heavyweight division. You bring this in, and it'll be interesting to see also, were there any side deals that Saudi Arabia worked out with DAZN, since Joshua has its global exclusive contract with the DAZN streaming service? Did Saudi Arabia invest in this? I think this LIV Golf Tour now has a deal with DAZN. I'm just looking behind the scenes. There's probably a lot of stuff that's going on. So in terms of our attitude to this, it gets a little complicated. Do you just condemn this thing and say don't have anything to do with it and just abandon all these people? Or do you just, as most of the boxing people are, just put your head in the sand and look the other way? There was also an interesting statement, earlier part of the press conference, by the way, that nobody paid attention to, was I found more interesting than when Eddie Hearn and Joshua and Usyk and their people spoke. They had the president of the Saudi Arabian Boxing Federation, Abdullah Ahmad Eid Al-Harbi, spoke, and he was in a lot of the pictures. And he talked about probably the majority of the country of Saudi Arabia now are youth. Now, I don't know if they count migrant workers who have really terrible conditions and very few rights, but it's a young population. And they want them, as he said, we want our people to see the stars and get active in the sports they watch. We want our young people to participate, to lead healthy lives. So they've not only been doing this with boxing, but they've been developing programs in other combat sports, bringing in top-level trainers in judo and jiu-jitsu there. And of course, football, which the Americans still call soccer, is the most popular sport in the world. They have all these different things being developed there. So you can't simply say that this fight is just a ruse to cover up and propaganda to show that they're a modern country with all their terrible human rights record. Yes, it's propaganda to show that, but there's a lot more that's going on. Perhaps in some of the smaller Middle Eastern countries that bring in large events, you could say they're not developing these types of programs seriously. But I think that they're doing that in Saudi Arabia, and they want to become a force, already starting to become a force in amateur boxing, both male and female amateur boxing, and eventually professional boxing. So I just want to put that nuanced stuff out there and to understand what the decline of boxing in the West that we talk about all the time and all the screw ups, who's going to come in and fill that void? It's going to be a country like Saudi Arabia that has all these hundreds of billions of dollars lying around. So I don't know what they're paying for this fight, but if they're paying $100 million for this fight or whatever the number really is, that's to us like $1 or something like that. And that's out of the public investment fund. It's not out of their own pockets. So look at all sides of this, because I don't think we could just simply ignore this and just say it's a bunch of, have some stereotypes of what's going on in Saudi Arabia. Look at all the different sides of it.
Well, that's some fascinating insight, Eddie, because if they are thinking that far ahead, I guess it is the best route to take. I mean, if you were looking to try to steer away money, build a sector because your petroleum dollar is going to be going down, sports is a way to do that. But there's just so much corruption that comes with that. It's like, if you are a country and they're like pious, right? You're a religious theocracy. Why are you inviting all of the nasty, ugly, sinful stuff that comes along with having professional fights and having professional sports and creating a whole entire industry? And what comes along with that. So why, do they think it's worth it? Obviously they think it's worth it because they're spending millions and millions of dollars to bring folks over. So it's I don't know. To me, it seems hypocritical. To me, it sounds like, they know what's going to come with it. You're trying to appease Westerners, but you're just going to create a bastion of crap in those little towns on the way to Mecca. That's how I look at it. You know what I mean?
Well, Jeddah is not a little town. It's a city of several million people, and they're growing it. And they also have their NEOM project, which might be a little bit pie in the sky. And again, everything was delayed by the pandemic, but they want to develop this super modern city, which might even have, according to them, Western laws, not Sharia law, which would bring in all these tourists and investment and entertainment.
But who governs that? If they give you Western laws, who's governing that? It's still a theocracy, right?
That's a good question, but those rules may not apply according to what they're saying in NEOM. So you might have different rules and different laws in different parts of the country. And that will be the real center where they could bring the Westerners. For example, you can't drink alcohol in Saudi Arabia. Maybe they'll allow that in NEOM.
Well, so it's the same thing. Yeah, but when you have, if you're, for Westerners that come to work in Saudi Arabia, there are little enclaves where Westerners work and live, and they kind of have their own little microcosm of life, and it's separate from everybody else. It's a compound basically.
But they don't have an American bar where they could go sit and smoke a cigar and drink whiskey, right?
Not yet. No, not yet. But see, look, they're sending a lot of their people to be educated in the West, in various Western universities. I just mentioned how she had been at USC and at University of California, Riverside. They're sending a lot of people to London, to various places in Europe. And if they're going to be studying history over there, they know that monarchies historically doomed one way or another. It's going to end either easily or in an ugly way, most likely in a very ugly way. So they're going to have to figure out a transition. If they want to have a more modern economy, they're going to have to do some other things that come along with it in terms of
Well, but
modernizing their political system.
What you're describing, though, is, not unlike what the Chinese did in the 1980s, in the 1970s, really. I mean, when China was opened up, and then when Deng Xiaoping came into power, he and Zhou Enlai, I mean, they mapped out the next 50 years of China's growth and development and what they would become.
Not Zhou Enlai.
Well,
Zhou Enlai
the end
was
of Zhou
against-
Enlai. Well, no,
Yeah.
no, well, that's an argument for another day. But yes, Zhou Enlai to some degree
They
always
worked to
understood.
modernize it, but they also took away a lot of the social gains that people had. It was very
I
complicated.
don't necessarily agree with that per se over time in terms of what they were looking to develop to get them into the modern world and diversify their economy. I'm not saying it's necessary.
Different situation, because China had a feudal regime. They had a revolution that set up a one-party communist party dictatorship that had tremendous instability under Mao. And when Mao died, the first thing they did is they threw out the Gang of Four, including his wife.
No, I know all of that, Eddie. What I'm talking about, though, is taking a long view on development, which is what we're talking about in terms of Saudi Arabia, not necessarily the nuances of what worked and what didn't work, because we know there are things that worked very well in China and things that didn't work at all. And Saudi Arabia is going, if they're really serious about taking their country and bringing it away from the kind of monarchy that it is now into a more modern, postmodern society, if you will, with a diversified economy and a more liberal, a more Western understanding within an Islamic construct of nationhood, which doesn't really even exist.
Right, that's crazy.
Which is very complicated. How that then, if they're looking to truly do that, that's an extraordinary change. And it's not something that's going to just happen over the next year. It's not something that just occurs. We will know whether it was successful if we have this discussion 20 years from now, 30 years from now. How has that development really gone? If we look at the Chinese model, it was, well, whatever. Our successors will look at this.
Right.
But if I mean, and you look at the 2030 program, it's very aggressive in terms of what they want to do, how they will measure their success, what comes next, what does a 2040 look like, or a 2050. Certainly China did that. Some things were very successful, some things were not. We weigh them over time. But it's not, I think what you're getting at, Eddie, is it's not something that's just a flash, that it's more nuanced. And this is one, sports and making entertainment and a sports opportunity as entertainment is part of that strategy of modernizing their economy and changing the way that their country is perceived in the world and how they grow and develop over time. I think that's what I'm hearing, and that's a very interesting perspective and one we should certainly look at.
Right, and I'm not saying it's going to be easy. There's going to be tremendous conflict, because one of the most obvious things of repression was the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, for which
yes.
they'd never really been any attribution of who was really responsible. That couldn't have happened in a country like that, although it was done in Turkey. That could not have been approved without the approval of Mohammed bin Salman. That's the way things work in that country. So what they did is they tried a couple of the lower level guys who were involved in that, and they put all the blame on a couple of rogue elements, and nobody buys that. And it really backfired, because how many people read Jamal Khashoggi in the Washington Post and around the world. They got so much more bad publicity and attention for that. And that was something that happened, what, about 4 years ago? People are still talking about it today. And so you also have what they're doing in Yemen with this terrible war in Yemen, although there's a temporary ceasefire going on.
Yeah, it's the second
There,
second cycle of it, right? Yeah.
yeah, there's so many different moving parts. A Saudi Arabian company now is starting to have investments in Israel, even though Saudi Arabia does not recognize Israel and is officially hostile to Israel. A lot of things are changing all at once, and there's going to be resistance among the Saudi royals and leaders to this. I'm not saying it's just going to all very peacefully, easily, and cheerily evolve. It's not going to happen that way. But there is certain things are being put inevitably in motion, and this is part of it. And I go back to my original point. Just saying this is sports washing misses all this other stuff because it involves world politics. President Biden is going to Saudi Arabia after previously dismissing them as a terrible regime. Why? Because of the changed world situation. They need to get more support against Russia and its war crimes and aggression against Ukraine. And that requires making certain compromises. The U.S. role in the Middle East is much weaker since the Iraq war, since the debacles in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Saudi Arabia is looking around. That's why they're even having talks with Iran, their bitter regional enemy. That's why they're starting to more privately deal with Israel. That's why you had the Abraham Accords were successful between Israel and United Arab Emirates, UAE, and Bahrain, and who was the other country? I think Morocco was involved then, and Sudan. There are a lot of moving parts and a lot of things changing around the world. And this boxing match is just one part of the whole thing. So that's something I just haven't seen nuanced analysis of this. And I go back that even Amnesty International is not saying for Joshua, don't fight there. They didn't say that. They're not advocating that. That's why it's a little complicated. And I also want to educate people in terms of what's happening in the world situation too, what's happening in the American political situation. All these things are interrelated, and what's happening in sports. So that's my point. Just don't simplify this. And you also have to figure out, do you just abandon these people in the boxing community in Saudi Arabia and in countries like this? Or do you find a way to have some engagement with them? And I don't know on what terms that would have to be, but I don't know that you just want to abandon all these people. I just think,
well, and to that point, that's why how we've been covering the issues with the IBA. Amateur sports become particularly important. Amateur boxing. I mean, the fact that Saudi Arabia in this period of time has started to allow women to box. Not only that, have an invitational, have a boxing team, which then presumably means they will go on to meets and start to develop talent, is a huge, huge thing. So corruption in the umbrella amateur boxing organization does also have negative impacts on those kinds of initiatives. And it's things that we need to keep reminding people of, that, not participating in the Olympics or having corruption of an umbrella amateur organization has other really important impacts downstream. And we can't lose sight of that. And we have to be able to support the fact that there is this groundswell of continuing and ongoing development of those kinds of sports initiatives.
I would just add one thing also, that we've talked a lot about the crisis in IBA and the ties to the very corrupt Gazprom. I put on Twitter a link to an article about all the corruption with the Russian state-controlled Gazprom energy monopoly. And Gazprom has said by the end of this year, they're no longer going to be financing IBA. So who's going to fill that gap? Either the whole
Yeah.
thing is going to collapse or somebody is going to come in. And I don't have any, I'm just this is educated speculation on this. But with all the attention by countries like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates to professional boxing, and also in amateur boxing, as we said, they're going to look at this situation and they're going to, Gazprom reportedly gave 30 million bucks to keep IBA afloat. 30 million bucks. This one fight, they're paying more than 30 million bucks for. They may be the ones to come in to bail out IBA. And if they do so, given their role in the Asian Boxing Confederation, everything that we've been talking about, it might be less controversial and it might be a bailout if IBA is willing to do it. On the other hand, they're just in such hot water with the rigged elections they lost in the Court of Arbitration for Sport. They now have to have new elections for president, for their board of directors. So that may be too far gone, but it's not going to go away. Even if IBA sinks, there may be some other organization to come along and create another Olympic Boxing Federation. And where do you think the money is going to come from that? It's not, I don't think it's too much is going to come from the West. I think it's going to come from countries in the Middle Eastern region. That's just a guess, because I've seen them do the same thing in other sports. I've seen them do it with jiu-jitsu in the United Arab Emirates, where they funded and played a big role in the Jiu-Jitsu International Federation, which is the federation that's trying to get jiu-jitsu to be an Olympic sport. That's one of the official international federations. And of course, with MMA and the long-time connections between Abu Dhabi and UFC and their own Abu Dhabi events, the Abu Dhabi Combat Club, Abu Dhabi Pro, all those jiu-jitsu events, they've had like a big interest in this. And this is a big opportunity. This is already an Olympic sport. You want to play a role in the Olympics and push your agenda, you could just basically buy this international federation. I don't know if they're going to do it. I don't know if it'll succeed, but I would say keep an eye out on it. Just an opinion.
Well, I know we talked about what may happen to Saudi Arabia in 20 or 30 years. I just looked, and Jeddah is 39 feet above sea level. Climate change is going to wipe them out. I'm going to tell you that now. So they've got a few years to get in their boxing program, take over Gazprom, go ahead and invest that money, because in 20, 30 years, they're going to be underwater. So with that, folks, we're going to call it a wrap. And you guys, Melissa, tell the folks where they can find you, baby.
Sure. I am at Girl Boxing Now on Twitter and Instagram, and I have a website, girlboxing.org.
That's right. And buy her book on Amazon, people.
Yes,
right?
A History of Women's Boxing.
That's right. You got to plug it, baby.
Years
Plug
of history.
it.
Plug it.
Plug it. Plug it. All right, Eddie. Tell the people where they can find you.
All right. And social media, mainly on Twitter at NHB News, until Elon Schmuck completely destroys it. I still have a Facebook account that once in a blue moon I check. Hit me on Twitter at NHB News, my website, eddiegoldman.com. And you can also go subscribe to my Patreon page to support independent journalism. That article that I talked about earlier about Saudi Arabia, why you shouldn't bring your crayons to Usyk-Joshua too. You might end up getting lashes, and that's at patreon.com/Eddie Goldman. So check all that stuff out and be nuanced. Right. And by the way, the boxing media, not only on what we discussed, but in all this stuff, can just go to hell, because the kind of stuff they're putting on, we saw reported by our friend Nicola Talent of the Sunday World in Ireland that Tyson Fury was banned from traveling to the United States. Also, along with Matthew Macklin, who with Kinahan co-founded MTK Global, Coogan Catchis, who helped set up IFL, the video site, and also Ben Davidson, the boxing trainer. And you don't see this reported on a lot of these websites. ESPN had a long story on what are the options for Tyson Fury. Is he going to fight again? Is he going to retire? Is he going to go to WWE? All these different things. And they didn't even mention that he's banned from coming to the US. And then Gareth Davies of the Telegraph, a long-time boxing and MMA writer, man, I've known the guy for a long period of time, did a softball interview with Tyson Fury, 20-something minutes, about what his future plans are. Fury said he's doing a world tour, not of boxing, but of appearances, of, schmoozing and singing and whatever. And he said he's going to Asia. He also said he's going to America. Davies didn't mention anything about this. Like, say, well, I thought you're banned from there. Absolutely nothing. So you're getting all this propaganda from these different sites. You want to find out what's going on, check out the War Room, check out No Holds Barred. That's where you're going to get the truth, and that's where you're going to find out what's really happening. And to hell with these propaganda sites. Don't pay much attention to them. You're better off just reading press releases, because you'll get some dates and times rather than the nonsense that these people are putting out.
That's right, folks. You heard it right here from Mr. Eddie Goldman. He is the conscious of combat sports. You guys,
the
undisputed. Right. Join our boxing community on Twitter. You can hit me up at Angry Afro Radio, because I am that angry Black woman. And I'm on Instagram at Fight Goddess Fitness. All right, so you guys, we'll see you next time. Please subscribe and follow us, and we will see you next week. Peace, love, and push-ups. Boom.